I love to remember my 3-year-old son with his arms thrown wide, riding on my shoulders, and the wind is gusting, and we're running together, and I'm holding on to his legs, and he laughs, and he shrieks, and he shouts with total commitment. In that moment, he is more free than any of us. I recall my 4-month-old daughter when she first glimpses me after she wakes up. And her feet, they kick wildly, and her arms wave, and she grasps up at my face, and a smile shapes the escape of her unpracticed laughter. Her whole body is exuberance, as if I'd been away for ages and not simply holding her while she chortled in her sleep. I am just the latest in a long line of loves which is forming her. She possesses less knowledge and more faith than any creature. My boy reaches out his little hand reverently and wondrously asking to take the ant, which is traversing my fingers, onto his own. And he receives as he asked, and with an astonished and relieved giggle of a trust that has been vindicated. He shakes me, or as the eclipse passes by in northern New York, he says, "Daddy, the moon is gone." In just the same way that he demands my attention for the trees and the stones and the clouds and motion, newly befriended comrades, his little arts. There is nothing at all unworthy of his recognition. We are asking here, what is it like to be a child? A phenomenological question of experience. Now, first, upon reflecting on my own children, of course, the foremost question that follows is, why do my children, by sheer luck of their birth, are able to maintain the stability of such experiences? While little Hind Rajab was murdered at 6 years old with her family and her first responders in Gaza, while fleeing under orders of Israel, having lived an entire child's lifetime under an apartheid system, killed because some of her fellow prison mates decided to strike back with great violence. We have to be able to explain why I can leave my children in relatively good condition to teach, to write, to record videos, to give conference presentations, while a mother in the Congo has to leave her infant in a box because she has to mine cobalt for cheap Western consumption. No question ought to torment us more when considering childhood than what sacrifices it would take to make childhood a justly distributed reality. A small part of accomplishing this task is to recognize what we are recognizing when we talk about a human child and what the experiences of my children say about being human. And that's why we turn to the topic of today. Because in his famous 1974 essay, What Is It Like to Be a Bat?, Thomas Nagel identifies the deep trouble of the separation of our consciousnesses. He writes that, quote, "An organism has conscious mental states if, and only if, there is something that it is like to be that organism, something that it is like for that organism," unquote. He argues against materialist reduction, saying we can't simply dissolve away the subjective character of experience, the experience of experience, without a contradiction. Each consciousness, Nagel argues, from a particular bat to a particular human, possesses, quote, "a single point of view, which I cannot take. To have consciousness is only ever to have that particular consciousness. I can imagine what it might be like to be a bat in flight, but only ever as my own self, my own consciousness, never as a bat experiences it. This is our great human tragedy. We only recognize ourselves. Only ourselves are immediate enough to call real. And yet here we meet a contradiction, because what separates also unites. My capacity to recognize myself, individual, particular, is only possible because of another whose definition is an experience and being which is not immediately present to my own. The other makes me, and I make them. Ask yourself, what do you possess which at some point of origin you did not receive? What of your personality was not formed by rubbing up against another's, for better or for worse? At root of our experience of the world is this contradiction, to be formed by what we are ignorant of. Here, I will argue that asking what it is like to be a child will teach us about the human being, that is, the human which is not an autonomous, independent, neutral subject, but rather is self-conscious relationship, gathered and bound together in increasing mass like gravity around an event horizon of love. With children, we might learn to live by risky faith and trust in each other. Because all of our experience, which we feebly and constantly threaten to capture with language and with reason, early childhood is the most formative, the most original, the most immediate of those experiences. Yet the great and terrible irony is that most of the most impactful part of that childhood, though we are all united in having lived it, we have all suffered the same theft in forgetting most of it. Luckily, I have had the great opportunity to observe my children for the last 3 years. And this is precisely the enchantment of children. They are living where we all once tread, but we can no longer recognize our own footprints. In all my life so far, I have found no more profound description of our coming to be than that of Swiss theologian Hans Urs von Balthasar. And he writes this in the 20th century, quote, "After a mother has smiled at her child for many days and weeks, she finally receives her child's smile in response. She has awakened love in the heart of her child. And as the child awakens to love, it also awakens to knowledge. The initially empty sense impressions gather meaningfully around the core of the thou. In this face, the primal foundation of being smiles at us as a mother and as a father. In the mother's smile, it dawns on the child that there is a world into which he is accepted and to which he is welcome. And it is in this primordial experience that he becomes aware of himself for the first time." And so Balthasar can write that the human not only finds the beautiful moving, rather he experiences himself as being moved and possessed by beauty. Unquote. To be a child is foremost then to have been welcomed into being, given introduction by another, requiring that other for everything. The horror of this goes without saying. There are so many whose innocence lasts but a few seconds, and there are some of us who found no genuine, no heartfelt welcome, coming into being mostly in pain, perhaps even short-lived. But our coming into being is always focused around some kind of a subject. Balthasar's description tracks with Edmund Husserl's insistence that experience is not like some little window into the world, not mere reception, but always consciousness of some particular object. From childhood, we are brought into subjectivity, awareness of ourself, by an object, and that mutuality never leaves us. The other is always the primal object. I rely on others to construct me in every aspect. My mother must smile at me for I to smile in return. I come to perceive of myself only in relation and response to other myselfs, the thous who surround me. I find myself fit like a puzzle into the contours of their pre-existence, just as they were fit into many generations which preceded them. This is the essential aspect of childhood, to be so dependent upon another, so in need of trusting them, that one is not even aware that there's an alternative to trust. Ours was total receptivity once. My individuality is not merely the relational multiplicity demarcated by physicality, by space and time. It is precisely my relationships with others. A child is a relation of trust incarnate. They know this instinctively. When loved, they feel fulfilled. When friendship is lacking, they can't name it, but they feel its absence acutely. When my son bumped his head for the first time against the edge of a table, his face wasn't just a look of pain, it was a look of relational betrayal, as if he was betrayed by the universe itself. He had been given no indication that this was a part of the deal. At no point in human life is the distance between I and thou closer than in childhood. Indeed, children have to learn that the other is not quite the I. Psychologists, they call this development the theory of other minds. It recognizes the distinction of the I and the thou. Martin Buber, the Austrian Jewish philosopher, wrote, quote, "The human child is granted some time to exchange the natural association with the world that is slipping away for a spiritual association, a relationship. The innateness of the longing for a relation is apparent even at the earliest and dimmest stage. Before any particulars can be perceived, dull glances push into the unclear space toward the indefinite. And at times when there is obviously no desire for nourishment, soft projections of the hands reach, aimlessly to all appearances, into the empty air towards the indefinite. Let anyone call this animalic. That doesn't help our comprehension. For precisely these glances will eventually, after many trials, come to rest upon the red arabesque wallpaper and not leave it until the soul of red has opened up to them. It's not the experience of an object, but coming to grips with a living, active being that confronts us. Little inarticulate sounds still ring out senselessly and persistently into the nothing, but one day they will have turned imperceptibly into a conversation. It is not as if a child first saw an object and then entered into some relationship with that. Rather, the longing for relation is primary, the cupped hand into which the being that confronts us nestles, and the relation to that, which is a wordless anticipation of saying, you come second. Unquote. This moment of other minds is one both of grave danger and great exaltation. For to recognize the difference of another is to be offered the repeated choice between loving and fearing, to track a pathway of vulnerability to the other, or to reject and flee what is most dangerous in the other. And so Buber continues in saying, quote, "In the beginning is the relation as the category of being, as a readiness, as a form that reaches out to be filled, as the model of the soul, the a priori of relation, the innate you." From these two reflections, Balthazar and Buber, I would like to derive three phenomenological descriptions of childhood. To answer the question, what is it like to be a child? First, the child as relationship. Maurice Merleau-Ponty seems to have written rightly when he spoke of consciousness, the world, the body as being all intertwined. None are static. None are a single object capable of easy study. By being in the world, the perceiving subject becomes a mirror of all others, We are formed and we are shaped by the perspectives given to us of us, as well as those expected of us. The path of interrelationality seems the best course between the empirical body and the idealist mind, which Merleau-Ponty was so concerned to chart. We are beings being perceived, shaped by that very act of perception and evaluation. The other is never beyond comprehension, for their existence constitutes myself. But neither are they captured by me or made my own. They must be, in Balthazar's theological terminology regarding the interaction of the Holy Trinity, which of course Christian theology claims we image, both a total act of self-giving and a total act of letting be. Self-giving and letting be. The mutuality of relationship. We are, on a fundamental level that is not appropriate for words, constituted by those whose relations have been poured into us. The early non-conscious accumulation of relational forces is what enables or constrains us to make a self-conscious relational association and choices later on. We are not just a thing of nature, but a constitution of interconnected, interforming relationships. When I recognize the thou as such, and the same is given to me in return, there the human being finds both its start and its final end, our first inspiration and our greatest satisfaction. Indeed, had we the time, we might examine how these relations extend beyond the fellow human and into the self, into the animal, into the plant, the cosmos, being God itself. For before we had yet to develop language and reason, the human being still received self-conscious relationships. When the I recognizes the thou, and the same is given in return, there the human being finds both, well, its start and final end, as I already said. In this way, we are each in childhood constructed by our parents. It is from them that I learn, not merely by example, how to hold a spoon or how to talk, but rather how I am even to conceive of myself, of what I am, what I merit, what I am worthy of. The teaching is immediately present by imitation of their perception of me. This is the radical extent to which a child is made up of trust, the incredible openness of a child to relational imprint. Hence, Balthazar says, my mother's smile awakens my smile in return. My formation is found in another, whose consciousness is inaccessible to me except as a gift. That's one. 2, the child as faith. The proper definition, I think, of the Greek pistis, traditionally translated as faith, is more like trust, allegiance, commitment. And the child exists only by this faith. This provides the grounding for Schleiermacher's argument that religion is the feeling of absolute dependency. He writes, quote, children remind us of the fact that God created humanity to live simply. They help adults shed their obsession with the complexities of work and public life. Indeed, children draw adults back into the most basic of human relationships, unquote. This reveals that human beings don't start with rationality and clear neutrality. Rather, we begin with commitment. We begin with love. We live by vulnerability. This is the language of a child, which then is subjected later on to good and true rational inquiry. But our most fundamental experience is this risky commitment, a child who is ever looking for a trust to be validated, vindicated, answered. The result of which, of course, is a secure attachment topology. Thus, no matter the time and place, you will find human beings seeking truth, the knowledge of themselves in relation to the world and others, the whole. Goodness, the ways in which they should best act and be acted upon, and beauty, what it means to enjoy these relational connections with all other things. We don't reason to these aims. We begin with them because we begin with a primordial welcome into the world by others, an existence that cannot exist except by others who are inaccessible to us directly. Faith is always properly fundamental of being human. Prior to all things, your finitude means that you began by belonging to, emerging from, requiring entirely another's care for you about whom you can never fully be certain. You can only live by trust. The child lives and breathes trust without ever realizing it for long weeks and months and years without considering the possibility of doubt. Instead, even the questions that a child asks are couched in the expectation of a trustworthy answer. They are, in more than one way, truly naked and without shame. Child is faith. Third, the child is beauty. As we recall from Husserl, the first object of consciousness is always another person. Their inner subjectivity shapes and forms our own, even if we only knew it, not in itself, but only as hands, as warmth, as comfort, as food, as sound. Our consciousness is always in directedness toward the other, which is not us, but is also us. Now this makes it an object of beauty. See, there was once when I saw the Milky Way for the first time. Cherry Springs Park, northern Pennsylvania. Best rated stargazing, darkest nights this side of the country. But it stretched from horizon to horizon, white and starry in streaks. Another time I looked into my daughter's eyes and I saw for the first time, as if I was meeting her intense concern in return. There was once an evening when I walked with my son on my shoulders into a dark field, and together we saw the brightest and longest shooting star I've ever witnessed, marvelous and sharp. The experience of beauty always involves a givenness, the sense of being offered a piece of another to partake in, which demands to become a part of ourselves. This is why beauty aches, even as it transports and transforms us. Beauty is an infusion of elevating relational energy. Simone Weil writes thusly, quote, "A beautiful thing involves no good except itself in its totality as it appears to us. We are drawn towards it without knowing what to ask of it. It offers us its own existence. We don't desire anything else. We possess it, and yet we still desire something. It is a sphinx, an enigma, a mystery which is painfully tantalizing. The great trouble in human life is that looking and eating are two different operations. Children feel this trouble already when they look at a cake for a long time, almost regretting that it should have to be eaten and yet are unable to help eating it. It may be that vice, depravity, and crime are nearly always, or perhaps always, in their essence, attempts to eat beauty, to eat what we should only look at." Unquote. With relationships as our nature, and seeking the unreachable with trust, the child approaches the world fundamentally as a world of beauty. All things are new, recognized as gifts just for them. All is unique. All is to be reported on and investigated upon and laughed with. All is to be questioned. All things bring astonishment. All things bear repeating. That's the stage my son is at now. Daddy, Daddy, how are bones made? How are bones made? How are bones made? Let's put these considerations together. Children as being at their most relational essence. Children as trusting and vulnerable. Children as at their most beauty attuned. This, everyone listening here once knew personally. It was the only way of our being before fear entered, before distrust broke in, before we learned that beauty could be marred. Perhaps this is why Christ insisted that truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Before we turn then to the question of education, Augustine of Hippo is incessantly demanding my attention. There he is. Few students of mine ever make it through his confessions without expressing shock from his exposition on original sin, that the only innocent thing about children is the weakness of their forms. Augustine looks to childhood as well, but Augustine sees as well humanity at its most basic and fundamental, without rational capacity to restrain our actions. But as he examines children, he finds them nearly entirely selfish and capricious, warring amongst themselves for their own exclusive self-interest, both incurvatus in se and libido dominandi, turned in upon ourselves with a dominating will. Those are, after all, Augustine's essential typologies of sin, of evil, and he sees them most acutely in the child. Augustine is not without a point here. Who has not seen a selfish child? Though I doubt a child is as awful as Augustine treats them. It is certainly not the case that I mean the child to be some sort of metaphysical purity, one each a perfect cherub who is only wounded by the exterior world. No. Children learn their cruelties and their aggressions and their self-interest from within, by imitation that is not merely an external imposition, but a relational strand that a child takes inward to constitute their own being before they are even able to reject it. They are born, as Marx warned us, with, quote, the tradition of all dead generations weighing like a nightmare on the brains of the living. Augustine doesn't disagree. Though corrupted, the human being by nature to him is in fact still quite good. We differ in terms of optimism, however, Augustine and I, for I believe that it is most fundamentally that good is still found in the child. It's most accessible in the child. As the same measures that can corrupt it can elevate it. And here we reach the essential role of education in the struggle with a world whose systems are voraciously stripping us clean of this relational identity. Here's the key. What does this phenomenology of childhood have to do with education? It is education's task to foster the extension of relational perichoresis, of interpenetrative relationship, to protect and make more reasonable a life of trust and vulnerability. That is, to maintain the child's natural attention and natural appreciation for that which is beautiful. That is, it is the job of education to be an ark which sustains the most original and fundamental essence of human being, love. To our first point, if a child is relationship, then the child learns by relationship. That is, they learn by imitation. This is one of the eldest and most well-studied aspects of the discipline of education, and a multitude of studies and theorists attest to its accuracy. What we've provided here is merely the phenomenological background for the imitation by which we already live. In the midst of this imitative pedagogy, the educator must ensure that they are not consuming the student, obliterating their relationality. Education often fails here, as it treats children as if they were commodities. Brains just to be filled with information, skills to be acquired so that they may properly consume and produce. The affirmation of life as a performance and the person as a brand, wherein one is constantly subjecting themselves to living not in the present relation, but in anticipation of future relations and of secondhand judgment. All of this, of course, is technologically accelerated. Like a careful surgeon, the educator must use a variety of tools, modeling passion, inquiry, and love, not the least among them, to reattach the human being to itself and to those around them. The educator is the curator of a museum, which is the human soul. The educator pokes and prods at its dormant parts, insisting that attention is worth being paid to how one is bound up in everything. To the second point, the younger the child, the more godlike the educator or parent is to them. For it is from them that their physical, social, psychological, and spiritual life derives entirely. This means that the wounds inflicted to the vulnerable are formative to life, and the virtues imbued are those that will enable the student to remain most open toward the world with trust. Their unaware little trust that is such grace that they don't even know there's an alternative. That trust has to be protected so that it will beckon again to others with hope. That vulnerability and trust are the means of healing salvation that throw open the whole vista of human to beyond my family, my identities, my nation, my people, to the recognition of the whole of humanity. Humans need the hope that it's not impossible to know another consciousness sufficiently. That perhaps vulnerability can, without shame, still gift myself to another and find that gift returned, just as the child always hopes, always faiths. Education is not information. Education is meaningful information. That is, better said, meaningful relationality, meaningful imitation. Education is to keep the flame alive that human relations are worthwhile, that seeking together truth and goodness and beauty is our greatest joy. The modern liberal subjectivity of capitalism fails because it assumes that human beings are machines of self-interest. But the human mind is, as I've heard it said, far more art gallery than debate chamber. Education reminds us that it's not good for the human being to be alone. And so to the third. Students come to my classes expecting a purely commercialized exchange. They provide the money, or their parents. My university provides the degree, and I provide the odd and unnecessary class that they must slog through. It's felt like a prison. It's felt as a time-served arrangement. Every paper, every reflection, every assignment is infected with this attitude. I am to pour abstract and tiresome information into their head. They vomit it out in a summary onto a test or a paper, and their alienated labor earns them a degree. Education simply bequeaths the minimally necessary knowledge for common labor, or specialized knowledge for the elite class of labor who reach the collegiate level. But education has to be the means by which we maintain the natural curiosity and wonder and appreciation for beauty that the child has by nature. We do this by bringing the student into recognition that they are already deeply engaged in the world as a theologian, a philosopher, a sociological, a political, a psychological, a technological subject. The educator reattaches the student to the wondrous mystery of their already belonging to a cosmic social fabric. As Carl Sagan once opined, quote, "They, students, memorize facts. By and large, though, the joy of discovery, the life behind those facts has gone out of them. They've lost much of the wonder and gained very little skepticism. Too many teachers and parents answer with irritation or ridicule or quickly move on to something else when questioned. Children soon recognize that somehow this kind of question annoys the grown-ups." See, unquote. To educate is to reduce the curse of alienation by always calling the student back to themselves and then out of themselves. Education is to maintain childhood into adulthood. In this sense, it is like being born again, becoming like a little child and perceiving the kingdom of heaven. The educator simply stirs up coals already dormant in the child. We've always been the recipients of our identity. We are essentially vulnerability, ever pretending to be otherwise. Embracing this reality of love at the heart of our being is precisely the condition for our transcendence, our interconnectivity with all things. So writes Martin Buber once more, quote, "Love does not cling to an I as if the you were merely its content or object. It is between I and you. Whoever does not know this, knows this with his being, does not know love. Love is a cosmic force. For those who stand in it and beheld in it, men emerge from their entanglement and busyness, and the good and the evil, the clever and the foolish, the beautiful and the ugly, one after another become actual and a you for them. That is, liberated, emerging into a unique confrontation. Love is the responsibility of an I for a you." Unquote. So let me end here. I don't have my Tolkien is in a shelf at home so that I can read it to my children. But let me end with a word here out to those Tolkien heads in the audience. The recent season, now it's a little more longer than recent, the most recent of Amazon's Rings of Power series just ended when I was writing this paper. And it introduced for the first time visually a classic Tolkien character, for better and for worse, Tom Bombadil. Now, Tom Bombadil, and we're not going to talk about quality or lack thereof of the Rings of Power. My one statement on it is there's enough high highs and low lows that I'm going to call it mid with a big asterisk. But Tom Bombadil is a strange sort of presence in the early chapters of The Lord of the Rings. He grinds the story to an ethereal halt, nearly as it's just begun. He is disinterested in the grand quest to destroy the ring. He's content with his own little songs and his woodland life, yet he is shown to be incredibly powerful and ancient beyond reckoning of anything else in already ancient Middle-earth. Is he a wood spirit of the English countryside, calling Tolkien back to his youth? Is he the incarnated presence of God? Tom Bombadil has fascinated fans of The Lord of the Rings for ages because of his charming oddity. I sing his songs still to this day with my son. Yet what purpose does he serve in the grander story? It wasn't until I was writing this paper that I really, suddenly it came to me. Tom Bombadil is the memory beyond shadow, that at the root of life, there is merriment, there is joy, there is a love which calls us into being with a song and a smile, a thou which recognizes my I with mutuality, with vulnerability, a trust that puts first the original experience of human beings and emerging from the other, purposed for beauty. The titular ring and its libido dominandi has no effect upon Tom, because he has no interest in anything other than harmony. He's not even tempted. As a child, before self-awareness knows nothing but trust. Tolkien's eldest is thus an image of our youngest, both sharing a hope that we can maintain that flickering love which is most essentially human, reuniting our disparate consciousnesses by the very thing which separates them, relationships grounded in an ethic of love. It is to maintaining a human being with the aspect of relationality, faith, and beauty as a whole relational creature that education must be purposed. In closing, I would like to dedicate this presentation to my first teacher, Jean-Louis Arsenault, who was gifted with the capacity to condescend to children and inspire them with strength and passion. He passed away on September the 14th, 2024. And he is and will be dearly